Hey guys, JKman99 here, and welcome to my second Lost video. Last month, as you know, we did the top 16 best episodes of Lost. So this month, what we're going to do is the top blank least episodes of Lost. So, I mean, you already saw the thumbnail, so you already know how many there are. Yeah, we're using the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. I'm not going to do 10 just because it's a Lost video, so I figured I'd use one of the numbers as opposed to 10. So sit back and relax, and this time we're going to go through the top 8 worst episodes of Lost. Number 8, The Package. The Package actually has a lot of things I really like. This is the first real Team Jacob episode, with Jack, Sun, Ben, Hurley, Ilana, Frank, Miles, and Richard all living together at the beach. I'm sorry, but I just love seeing this group interact together. It's just such a random group of characters, particularly Ben and Richard interacting with the survivors. Like, even when the smoke monster did something to Sun, like, immediately everybody blames Ben. And even just when he says, I was out picking mangoes, like, that's just a funny thing to think about. We have some great scenes in this episode, with Jin seeing his daughter on camera and Desmond's first appearance in an episode during season 6. There are just a few things that made this episode less memorable for me. First off, the Flashsideways. I really didn't like the secret relationship between Sun and Jin. I did not care for their story arc in the Flashsideways. I didn't like how they weren't married. After a great Richard episode, where we learn about his background and we see him reunite with his long-lost love, it's like, next week, Jin gets kidnapped. Like, what? That's your big plot point? That's where the show's going? It just seemed like such a filler episode. It was like, okay, what are we doing at this point? It really seemed like we were stalling, and that's what really bothered me about it. And at this point in the show, it wasn't very Jin-centric. They just didn't really have anything for Jin to do. And finally, Sun's head injury. Now, I know that it was an interesting link between the two Suns, the one in the Flashsideways and the one on the island. They're like, oh my goodness, suddenly they both can't speak English. What could that possibly mean? Well, we now know that it means nothing. Again, I like the episode. I thought the episode overall was good, but it just could have been a little bit better. Number 7, Expose. This episode has a lot more positives than people give it credit for. It shows that Nikki and Paulo aren't stupid. It cleverly shows different storylines from different points of view. It went back to stories that we all knew, but showed it from different perspectives. Like, it went back to the case episode and showed like a different huddle with different characters. And they brought back some old guest stars and kind of made them part of the storyline too, which was a nice perspective to show that, like, Nikki and Paul had friends with other survivors on the island. We also have the smoke monster as a spider, which was pretty cool. And of course, they were buried alive, and that was very interesting. The Sawyer Sun scene where they talk about how Charlie was the one who kidnapped Sun back in season 2. Like, that was a pretty great scene. And then, of course, we had just watching the island survivors function with Sawyer as the leader. Everybody looked to Sawyer when Nikki and Paulo apparently died. But of course, the main problem with this episode is, who cares about Nikki and Paulo? I mean, Ilana dies in an instant, so does Frogurt, so does many more interesting characters. Nikki and Paulo did not need a 1-hour episode just to die. Write them off the show a different way. Death is fine. But we didn't need a Nikki Paulo backstory. Just their island perspectives would have been enough. The island flashbacks were pretty cool. A lot of people have this as the worst Lost episode, but I wouldn't go that far. The show did a lot of good things in this episode, but the Nikki and Paul thing was pretty boring. We didn't need to see their backstory of what happened to them off island. Because think about it, we never got Ilana's, We didn't get other people like Frogurt or Dr. Arzt, so therefore we didn't need one for Nikki and Paulo. Number 6, confirmed dead. This episode was both entertaining and necessary. We needed to be introduced to the freighter people. There was a nice little B storyline with Ben, Locke, and Sawyer. The interactions between the 3 characters were great, and it raised a great question. Why are they keeping Ben alive in the first place? And he almost actually kind of saw the end, but then of course Ben knew about the boat people, so suddenly he's valuable. But that's the ultimate flaw with this episode. The boat characters. That's what this episode was about. It was the introduction to the boat characters. And the truth is, almost none of them are interesting, even though Frank is awesome. Daniel has memory issues, so it's like, he was just so annoying that first episode. Like, this guy just pops down and, and he's just like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know. Dan didn't really do it for me in season 4. He gets a little bit better in season 5, but I was never really a Daniel Faraday fan, at least in season 4. And then you got Miles, who was psychic, and that scene of his means nothing in relation to the rest of the show. Like, it kind of deviates from what we learn about, like, possibly other psychics. And honestly, the Miles psychic, I would say, is probably one of the worst scenes in the show, actually. Not in my top 4, but one of the worst. Charlotte knows about the island, but who cares? Like, we get that polar bear flashback thing, but I mean, like, that leads nowhere. And at the time, it didn't really spark my interest even then. It was just like, okay, like these characters are just dropping into the island one by one, and I don't really care about them. I didn't really want new characters, so I just didn't care. The only one that had a little bit of interest was Frank, and that was only because Frank was supposed to be on the plane, so that's good. Even though the new characters needed some intro, this episode is the new character intro episode. That's all this is. The new characters are boring, and because of that, it hurts the episode. Number 5, Fire and Water. All in all, great production design. I want to start off by saying that if you haven't seen it, watch the DVD commentary on this episode. They put a lot into the production design. I know they do that every episode, but in this particular one, you can see how much effort really went into Fire and Water, and you got to respect it from that aspect. However, the topic, oh my gosh, the topic was just not necessary at this point. So they just had come off of the hunting party episode, one of my favorite episodes, where it was moving the story along. They talk to the others, and they come back, and what's the issue? What's the story on this week's episode of Lost? Charlie deals with heroin addiction. Charlie's issues with drugs. I mean, come on, show. We already dealt with this in the Moth episode. That should have taken care of this whole thing. Now, I know that at the end of season 1, Exodus Part 2, Charlie found the heroin in the plane. And then it was brought up 2 episodes prior to this when Echo and Charlie go off and try to find the plane. I was hoping the Echo episode would have ended the heroin thing once and for all, but no, they brought it back 2 episodes later. And I do realize why they had to bring it back, because they didn't technically resolve it in that episode. Like, Claire found out and Charlie was, trying to explain himself and everything like that. So they really try to resolve all that here. But there's just several things about this episode I don't like. I don't like how the whole, they had to baptize the baby thing. Like, that just, it's like, oh, and Charlie was like going crazy just to try to baptize the baby. Like, I just didn't buy it. I'm like, what? Like, even if he's having issues, like, would Charlie really be doing all this? And then you have Locke come in, he punches Charlie. I just did not like any of that. The only outcome of all this that I liked was that where it led both Charlie and Claire after this. Like, they got to go on separate adventures, and they didn't really, like, rely on each other. And maybe that's what the show was trying to do. They were trying to split Charlie and Claire up so they could go on adventures on their own. But my thought is, why did they have to split them up? Like, why couldn't they have been just a more independent couple and, Charlie could go off and do his thing and Claire could go off and do her thing. Like in season 3 when they're together, like when Charlie goes off to ride the car around, like Claire didn't go with them. Like you can be independent. You didn't need to like break them up just so they can be independent characters. And again, I just think about the description of this episode. Charlie deals with heroin addiction. It's just like, and look, I understand that usually like if you think you're done with a drug and then like it reappears, like you can get re-addicted. I get all that. So like from a realistic standpoint, I see why this episode's a thing. It's just like, but like the storyline of Charlie defeating the drug addiction, I just don't understand like why that had to be his thing. Like why we had to come back to that. We could have done other things with Charlie. Just like bringing back the drugs, I just thought was a rehash of something we had already done. And that's how I feel about this episode. I feel that this was a clear filler episode, just something to put in between the hunting party and the long con. Honestly, when I rewatch the show, like I usually try to skip this episode. I'm just like, I don't care about what happens. And it's so sad because, like I said at the beginning of this, they put so much effort into the production design of this episode. They even do that thing with the two angels on the beach with the mom and Claire, and there's even a little Easter egg with the plane in the background. Like they do some really cool stuff in the dream sequences, but again, it was in a really pointless episode. It was well designed, it was really well acted, and actually I didn't mind the real flashback in this episode. Like I feel like the flashback for Charlie could have gone somewhere else, like in a different storyline that just wasn't, like let's try to steal the baby and run into the water. Like see, this is so frustrating, and it's so funny because you would think that like this could be my least favorite, but there's 4 more that actually that I consider not even worse than this one. Number 4, whatever the case may be. This episode could be easily argued for my least favorite, but the other 3 that come after this have very nagging issues that this episode doesn't, and I'll get to that when I get to those episodes. In this episode, Kate robs a bank for a toy plane, and Jack gets the guns. And that's basically what happens in this episode. The only part of the episode that really moves the story forward was the guns, and then of course they relocate the beach. Watching Kate and Sawyer get along and then fight was pretty heartbreaking actually, because you actually want to see them get along. They have this nice little cute moment in the lagoon, and then they're fighting the rest of the episode, and you don't want them to fight, you want them to get along. Yeah, I do not like the Kate and Sawyer scenes in this episode at all. This was a very good variety episode, actually. Like, if you look at all the other just random scenes that happen, like notably Charlie and Rose, like those are actually pretty good. And it was kind of needed after, and this was one of those episodes that was kind of needed to be more of a chill episode because they had the high intensity after Claire is kidnapped and all the Cowboys have daddy issues episode. But despite the good-natured variety, the tone of the show was just so boring, and in the end, it just doesn't mean anything. Okay, so the toy plane is still very aggravating because, as we know, it belonged to Tom, who was Kate's friend, who got shot when Kate was trying to run. We don't know that yet in this episode. But clearly, here's the situation. She doesn't care about Tom or that plane at all as the series progresses. And yet this whole episode is dedicated to that plane. She robs a bank and just to get to the security box just for that plane that belonged to this friend. And then, by season 2, she doesn't care about the plane or the friend. You never see that plane again. So in the end, this episode is pretty pointless because the hatch makes the guns pretty worthless. So by the time season 2 comes around, this episode literally means nothing. It's just a complete waste of time. The only thing this episode is good for is needed filler buffer in this case, between the Claire gets kidnapped episode and the Claire gets found episode. You need, obviously, a buffer. That's the one thing that the show does need that it's hard for me to even figure out, because they had the worst episodes between those two events, but you need something in there, because otherwise it's just like all of a sudden Claire's found and you know what's going on there. Number 3, Some Like It Hoth. Okay, this had some good Hurley dialogue. It was good to get to know Dr. Chang, and Sawyer knocking out Phil at the end was pretty good too. There's just one nagging thing about this episode. It's a Miles episode. I mean, who cares about Miles? He talks to the dead, that's it. His character adds nothing else to the show, except for a few laughs every now and then. He's a bad character, he steals some diamonds, and isn't in the church with Sawyer in the end. I mean, Miles' connection with Jacob's bodyguards is interesting, but it doesn't lead anywhere. So if you're a Miles fan, I'm sure this was great, but I'm not, so it wasn't. If I had to honestly assess this, Miles is my least favorite character in all of Lost. So the fact that they had a whole episode about him, I just could care less. And yeah, I mean, this is another episode I like to skip when I do my Lost rewatches, because I just don't care at all. The only good thing is the Hurley dialogue is pretty funny. And that's it. Like, this is one you really can skip, because there's also, I mean, Jacob's bodyguards, they die so quick at the beginning of season 6. So who cares that, okay, so Miles had a small connection with the bodyguards. Who cares? So, yeah, not a good episode. Number 2, Dave. Alright, so with this episode, the show had a great opportunity to connect some dots, but it did not. Hurley can talk to the dead by season 6. That's how he talks to Jacob. We all wonder if Hurley is crazy or can he actually do it. We know he can do it because in season 6, he can talk to dead Jacob. We know he died. We see him talking to Jacob. So in season 2, though, when he was talking to Dave was just an imaginary friend. No. In season 2, if they had made Dave dead at that time, all this would have added up by season 6, and this would have made the show so much better for doing so. Because think about it, this is almost like a walkabout opportunity. We didn't really get into Hurley talking to the dead until season 4, and then we really don't get into it until season 5 again, and then finally it's full on in season 6. But we could have started it in season 2 with the Dave episode, and then, kind of forgotten about it for a couple seasons, and then come back to it in season 4. But instead, we have two different things going on now. So now we got that Hurley is sometimes talking to imaginary friends, and then at other times talking to actual dead people. Now, I mean, not to turn this into a theory video all of a sudden, but you kind of theorize that. And actually, no, my theory doesn't even work. I was about to say you can theorize that it's imaginary when he's off the island, but not imaginary when he's on the island. But that's not the case, because Charlie comes to him when he's off island, but then Dave comes to him on island and off island. So that clearly is not the case. So no, Dave isn't real. Hurley made him up, and yeah, it's very unfortunate that they didn't think of that earlier and connect those dots. And it's honestly just a waste of time to see Hurley just talking to an imaginary friend and concerning himself with an imaginary friend most of the episode. Now, some things save this from being my least favorite episode. One, there is a great scene between Saeed and Ben where Saeed just almost shoots Ben just in the hatch. And best of all, it's great to see Hurley get Libby by the end of the episode. Then we see Libby in the psych ward, and then you never find out why she was there, at least not in the real in the non-Flashsideways storyline. And and then the food scene. Why destroy all that food? Come on, you're on an island with minimal supplies. Don't destroy your food no matter what your problems are. Overall, though, the acting is great, and and Sawyer getting beat up is priceless. I love that scene where Hurley beats up Sawyer. The reason this isn't my least favorite is because even though the imaginary friend scene was a waste of time, it did actually happen, though. Unlike my least favorite episode where something doesn't happen. Number 1, Hearts and Minds. So once again, this is the second filler episode between the Claire kidnappings. They had to do something between the episode where Claire got kidnapped and the episode where they find Claire. While this is my least favorite episode, I do like a lot about it, like I do all the episodes. How Shannon manipulates Boone is great, and finding out that they hooked up off island is a very interesting take on their characters. It's something you don't see coming. Also, we learn a little bit about the hatch, and that's it. Now stop. That's good. No more. If the episode would have had just this, that would have been fine. And if it would have just somehow ended with Boone and Shannon deciding to spend some time apart, that's good. That's all you had to do. Whatever you do, though, don't make a quarter of the episode fake. That's right. That's what they decided to do here. Locke decides to drug Boone, and everything that Boone experiences from the smoke monster to Shannon dying isn't real. Now, there isn't too much time or dialogue during that part, but it is enough to have a rare character in the smoke monster and a death scene as well that didn't happen. You see the smoke monster, you hear the smoke monster for only the second time since the pilot, so it's kind of a wake-up call there. Oh, look, the monster's back. Or actually, no, I think you heard it another time in the walkabout, but you know what I mean. You hadn't heard too much from the monster at that point. And then Shannon dies, and you're like, oh my god, one of the main characters is dead. So to put all that energy into those two things, and then it turns out that neither of them actually happened, it's oh, okay, well, why'd you waste my time with this, I think there were other ways that Boone and Shannon could have stopped hanging out with each other without Locke having to drug Boone. There's more to it, but from a story perspective, there's other things they could have come up with, because now, if you ever rewatch the show, all that is just not real. So it's why would you watch it again? That's why this is my least favorite episode of the show, because it's just, you don't take even a quarter of your episode and make it something that has actually no merit to the rest of the story. Alright, and that was my number 1 least favorite episode of Lost, Hearts and Minds. Now you're probably wondering, wait a minute, Stranger in a Strange Land, Season 3, Episode 9, where's that on your list? Well, the truth is I like that episode, guys. I like all these episodes, as I already stated. Every single one of these episodes I actually like. There's just ones I like least versus the most, and in this case, Hearts and Minds, again, it's my least favorite, but I love 75% of the scenes in the episode. I just hate the 25 that don't count. So why do I not have Stranger in Strangeland on this list? Is because it's a Jack flashback. You learn more about Jack. Yeah, it's about the tattoos and everything, but you learn more about him, and he's the main character of the show. So I don't think that's something you just want to gloss completely over. And in fact, it's not even my worst flashback of Jack. I think my least favorite flashback of Jack is the one where he gets married, because in that one, it's okay, we know he gets married. We don't need to see the marriage, you just need to see him married. You don't need that flashback at all. So that's where I'm basically at with this one. And, you're introduced to Isabella. I liked that, and you get to see Jack and Juliet kind of formulate their friendship, and Jack make his deals with Ben. I think it's an okay episode, guys. I'm sorry, I just do. yeah, I don't really have a problem with it. It's probably somewhere in my top 20 least favorite if I really had to go back that far, but it's definitely not in my top 8. So, so there you go on that. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. What's your least favorite episode of Lost? Let me know. It's probably Stranger or Strangeland, but if it's not, and if it's not any of the ones I listed, let me know what it is. I'm very curious to hear what it is. And next month, we are going to do the best scenes of Lost. So I look forward to that. Hope you guys do too, and I will see you next month for that. Thank you so much for tuning into this video, and take care.